Hello and welcome everyone to this Axiom webinar. Please let me know if you can hear me well. So I think we can start first with a little recap of what we have learned during the previous seminar, and then we can continue with our today's topic, which is to discuss more about how to use external libraries with Scala. So as you recall, during the previous seminar, we have already scratched the surface and started to discuss the fact that Scala has some ecosystem of libraries and APIs that are available, and these are the things that are written by other people and pieces of programs that are written by other people and are available for other programmers to use. Just as a little recap, let me share my screen. So one way to discover those APIs, which stands for Application Programming Interface, which are those things that are available online for people to use. One way to discover them is to Google for awesome APIs. And by the way, this awesome thingy, it is sort of a trend on GitHub. So GitHub is a place where people upload their software projects. So usually every software project, it has some ecosystem of tools available for it. And you can usually discover those tools by writing awesome and the name of the programming language. Like, for instance, you can have awesome Python, for example, which is a programming language that is usually used for data science. So if you write awesome Python, then you will discover, well, the GitHub page with various tools available for Python. So you can see, for example, tools for everything, for asynchronous programming, for data validation, data analysis, deep learning, e-commerce, email. So that's for Python, just an illustration. For Scala, there is the same thing. Awesome Scala, there is this on GitHub page of stuff that is recommended to be used with Scala, but also there is a program similar to that on the main website of Scala, on the official website of Scala. So there is this index.scalalang.org, which shows up in the search, which contains also various tools that you can use with Scala. And similarly for APIs, we have seen that you can write awesome API, and API is a service that is running online that you can use together with your programs for your programs to be empowered and do more things. Like, for instance, well, this is not what I wanted, I guess, because there are many different people who are making those APIs. So maybe if I write public API, awesome public API, so I get another GitHub page. And why I didn't like this one? Well, because here people put only 2,000 stars under it. And for this repository, we have 200,000 stars. So this one is more popular, so probably more up to date. So, but again, you have a lot of various APIs that you can use together with your programs. So we were looking at various services online that are available to be used together with your programs to enable various functionality. Is it clear for everyone what is an API and what is a library and why they are important? If it is not clear, then please write in the chat. So today we are going to be learning how to use the libraries to enable Scala to do more things. And one of the many things that we will see how to do is to also access the APIs. Okay, so the question in chat is, what is the difference between APIs and library? So the difference is very subtle. So let me share my whiteboard maybe. APIs and libraries, they can actually be used interchangeably, but the thing is, I didn't use the word API in a very precise manner because, libraries can also have APIs. So API stands for Application Programming Interface. So what does that mean? So interface is something on the, okay, just one moment. I need to share my whiteboard again because it stopped sharing. One moment, sorry about this. The whiteboard didn't synchronize. I'll restart it. Okay. So application programming interface, the API, it's a very common term used in programming, and let's see what it means actually. So interface is the key word here, because interface is something that sits in between two things. So interface, like for instance, if you have a TV, for example, then your remote with buttons is an interface between you and TV, because it allows you to control the TV. So interface is something that lies in between two pieces of software, or between a person and a piece of software that allows those two parties to communicate. It can be, for example, a person talking to the TV indirectly via the remote control. So remote control will be an interface to the TV. It can be, for example, if you are driving a car, then to drive a car, you need to have access to the steering wheel and to the gas pedal and to the brakes and to the dashboard with speed and everything like that. So that will be the interface for you to drive the car, right? Because you do not access the engine of the car directly. What you do is you access the dashboard and the steering wheel to drive that car. So if you have a car, the car is one party that you're trying to access. The driver is another party. And to access the car, to drive the car, there is a steering wheel and a dashboard. And you access the dashboard first to access the car and to drive the car. So in both of those cases, the dashboard is an interface and the remote control is an interface. It's something in between two parties. Well, next we have two other words like application and programming. So let's start from the end. Application programming is an act of creating an application, like a programmer writes an application. And what the API refers to, what the interface refers to, is between the programmer who writes the program and various components that the programmer uses to write those programs. Because in programming, we do not reinvent the wheel. People have already implemented stuff to do various things in programming. Like, for example, if you have the task to access the flight data that is stored somewhere on the server, Like there is a server somewhere online on the internet. And so this server lives on the internet, and it is accessed by a program, by a website. This search bar. So this is a website, and it needs to be, so the data that lives on this server, the flight data, it needs to be accessed somehow by this website over here. So the same way as in case of the car and the driver, we have two parties, and one party needs to access the other party, the car. So driver needs to access the car. And in the other case, in the case of TV, there is a person who needs to access the TV. And they need to access those things using a certain means. And these means are called interface. So same thing here. There are two programs. There is a website that runs a search engine, and there is the data that the website uses. So there needs to be an interface to access this data. And this interface is called an API. So in this case, this is a web API, because the data, it lives in the internet, on the internet, and the program needs to communicate with some service on the internet to access the data. So there is a concept of web APIs that allows you to do that. But also internally, the program, it's not a monolith. It's not written from scratch by a programmer. Usually we use some building blocks to build our programs. So the building blocks in question might be the collections. So collections is the lists, for example, that we have covered before during our previous seminars. So those lists are there in the programming language. So somebody wrote them for us so that we do not need to write them from scratch, but we can use them to achieve our goals. Next, there is our program. What it does is it communicates over the internet. So there needs to be a component that knows how to communicate over the internet. So another building block of our program would be, this is technically called HTTP client. So HTTP client is the thing that makes your program internet aware, that makes your program capable of talking to other programs over the internet. So all of those are pieces of software that our program is made of, and they are written by other programmers. So again, we have the case where there are two parties. First, there is a program that is written by us, the search engine, and then there are components that this program is made of, the collections, for example, and the HTTP client. And again, we need from our program, we need to communicate with those two building blocks, right? We need to use them somehow, because it's not clear at all how exactly to use a piece of some random piece of software. There needs to be a manual, an instruction provided on how exactly to use that. And that mode of interactions, that instructions, that manual, it is an API to the library. So those two things are libraries. And there is an API that they provide for the programmer to communicate with them. So in general, the API is like this. So there is some service that can be a library or a web service. And whenever you have a library or service or some web service that you want other people to use, you need to specify how other people might want to use this service, how the interaction will happen. And this is done by the API. So to use your service or library, people or programs, they are going to they're going to talk to the API first, and the API is going to talk to the underlying service, and then it's going to get back to the one who talked to them with the data provided by the API. So the principle of the API is central to all of the programming, and it's an interface that allows you to communicate with the underlying service, library, or web service. Is that more clear? Okay, so now we're going to have a look at the various APIs and what Scala can provide to access them. So first of all, during the previous seminar, what we were discussing is the concept of the public API. So public API in this context, it refers to web services. So it means that somebody created a website that can talk to programs, that programs can talk to. And this website is going to provide those programs with various useful information. Like, for instance, there are services for blockchain, for example. If you're into crypto investing, there are various APIs that would allow you to get information about the current course, about the current rate of exchange of cryptocurrencies, some APIs that would allow you to trade your cryptocurrency on various exchanges and so on. And if you're building, for example, a healthcare application, then you might want to go to the health API and see what services are there online for you to be able to access the data that they provide. So these were the public APIs, but also there are if you have a public API, then there is a question like, how exactly do you access this public API? Like, for instance, let's take some random API, which would be, for example, what can we take? Let's see if we can do something with transportation. What we want ideally is this auth colon to be set to no, because auth is for authorization or authentication. And if it requires authentication, then it means we might need to register for it, which we wouldn't want. So let's just explore those APIs and see if we need to register for them. Okay, this one doesn't allow us. Okay, this one looks like we do not need a registration for it. So what you usually see when you click on one of those public APIs, public services, is that it shows you an interface like this. So usually you will see a line over here that, well, one line or multiple lines that say something like get, and then there is a slash and some URL-like thing after the slash, which looks like a URL, and in fact it is a URL, and there is some description about how it works. So the way it is called is an API endpoint. Sorry for all the clicking. Every API, every public API, it has certain API endpoints, so-called, and those API endpoints are various services that it provides. Like, for instance, this one, this API, it provides only one endpoint, it seems, because there is only one, this get thingy, but maybe I can show you some other examples so that you can get an idea of what I'm talking about. So maybe let's see some other random APIs. Okay, this one also provides just one endpoint, one URL. So maybe let's see Okay, this one, it doesn't look like API at all. Maybe BlaBlaCar, I don't know. Let's see. Okay, this one. Okay, BlaBlaCar URL formats. Okay, maybe it's also not the best example. Maybe I'll show you on the example of Rapid API, which is a service that aggregates various APIs into services that you can use uniformly. So it's like a search engine for APIs. So if you go, for example, to transportation and you go to this one, for example, timetable lookup, it says access worldwide flight schedules with connection built-in. So you see here to the left, it has all those get and then the description. And yeah, they're all get here. And you can click on them. And the repeating thing is that you get a URL, which is a link that you can access and you can call from your program to get access to this service. Like, for instance, there is, for example, an endpoint to obtain the airport information. So what it means is that if you call this link that this service provides from your program, if you call this link, then you're going to receive some information about the airport. So here, for example, you can put the airport code, like, for example, GVA for Geneva. And here you see that it's substituted to the link. If you call this link, you're going to obtain information about this airport. Okay, so maybe a little bit of general theory about how the APIs work, the public APIs. So usually what you're going to see is that APIs is what they boil down to is a bunch of links. And as the links have words like get or post in front of them. So for instance, you might see get slash flight slash, and then here it will be something like flight code, something like that. And then there will be another endpoint, for example, which would be, for example, post, which will be slash airport, or maybe not airport, maybe schedule slash create new itinerary item. So something like that. The point is that there is the component with the word get or post, and there is a component of the link with the link. So technically, the get or post thingy is called a method. Don't confuse it with a Scala method. It is an HTTP method. And I'll explain what it stands for a little bit further down the line. And the URL part, the link part, it starts with a slash. And usually what it means is that before slash, you need to write the service where it comes from. Like, for instance, in our case of Rapid API, I'll show you again. Let me show you again. There is this, yeah, you have an example here of an endpoint. It has a method, which is get in this case, and then there is a link. So link can be written like this with a full link, or it can be written only with the pass to the API endpoint while omitting everything that goes before this pass. So the address of the website before the slash is something that can be omitted because it is understood that it comes from this website, and people usually don't write it. But I mean, the thing to remember is that it is a URL, a link that you can click and go to this service. So so this will be URL or link. And the idea is that from your program to access, for example, the flights data, to interact with that service, what you're going to do is you're going to make the program go to this link. So there is your program. And it goes, there is the internet with the link. This is a link endpoint. So you make the program go to this link. Get endpoint, for example, and this link, when the program goes there, it will provide the program with some information that it requested. So it works exactly like you go into some website. Like, for instance, if I want to get Google, what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in the search bar www.google.com, and I'll get Google. So the same way works with programs. They have those URLs that they can type in. You can make them type in, and they're going to get the information that they have requested. Is it clear so far about the APIs and the URLs? Now about the method. So if you Google for HTTP methods, so first of all, HTTP is a standard for accessing internet. So all of the internet, it works on this standard, on this technology called HTTP, which is stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol, so HTTP. So whenever you go to any website, you're making use of this technology of HTTP, because this is how internet works under the hood. It's the technology that allows you to access websites online. And it turns out that whenever you click on a link, what happens is that some request goes to the server, and the request can be of several kinds. So usually the request, always a request contains a link. So when I enter in the search bar www.google.com, what I do is I send a request to the URL, to the google.com URL. I send a certain request, and the requests can be of various kinds. And here you can see all of the kinds that request can be. And the technical term for those kinds are methods, so HTTP request methods. The most popular one is GET, because GET is a request for the server to give you something back. Usually it happens when you access a website. What happens when you click on some link is you say to that link is, okay, I want to get what you have. I want to get your content. And for this, the GET request is sent by your browser to the server. There are various other kinds of requests that you probably would very rarely encounter, but there is just one request to be aware about from all this list. You don't need to know what all of this do, but only one you need to know, which is POST. And POST is a counterpart of GET, because POST is about sending something to the server. Like, for instance, can you maybe think of any example when you might want to send something to the link instead of getting something from the link? Does anyone have any example of that? Yeah, questionnaire answers, like surveys. Yeah, that's exactly that. Also, for example, if you register on some website and it asks you to fill in your details, and then click register button. That's also an example of the post request, because you send something to the server. Also an example of the post request, like Mehdi says in chat, it is online order. You also send a post request to place an online order. And also it is login into some website and so on. So all of those are post requests. So in the APIs, usually you see that here the APIs that I have opened, they are all GET requests, because it's a flight API, flight timetable API. And here, what you do is you just request data. The most that you ever send to it is the parameters of your query. Like, for example, if you're requesting, for instance, you're requesting the information about the flights, like flight schedules, you're trying to request flight schedules. You might want to enter the details of your flight, like where you're flying from, which will be, for example, Geneva Airport. And you see in the link, you got Geneva here. The second parameter refers to Los Angeles Airport, but maybe you're flying to, for example, Paris, Charles de Gaulle Airport. So you enter CDG for the airport code. You see that it appeared here. And here you have the date where you're flying, which would be, for example, 2022, 11, I don't know, 25. Here you can see the format is year, month, and day, like this, and it is reflected here. So the point is that usually if you need to look something up, you still need to send some data to the server, such as airport codes and the times that you're flying, but it is still a GET request, because ultimately you are getting stuff from the server. You're not sending stuff to the server, you're getting stuff from the server. So that would be the GET request. And here in this API, there are all GET requests. Usually when you get post requests is, if, for example, when you have a social network API and you want to post to social network, that would be, for example, a post request. If you want to post, for example, something to Facebook, that's a post request. So that's the way it works. Now the question is, how exactly are you going to call those API endpoints? And the answer is that you need a component in your Scala program that would allow you to call this API. And well, let us have a look at how to do that. So maybe I'll open VS Code and I'll share my okay, let me share my desktop, I guess. Okay, can you see my desktop? Okay, so what I'll do is I'll create a new folder, which would be using libraries in Scala. I'll drag and drop this folder to VS Code, and then I'll create a new file, which I'll call main.scala. I'll create it here in the folder that I have. And first thing to do would be to test that it works. And to test that it works, what we need is three things. And first of them would be to specify the Scala version, which is optional, but which is highly recommended. So because sometimes Scala evolves, it gets new versions. So what you want is you want to know the exact Scala versions that you're using. And to do that, I'm going to go to Scala CLI to look up Scala CLI, because Scala CLI is the tool that is used to compile Scala and to run Scala. I'm going to go to documentation and not commands, but what we need is Scala version. Let me just check the getting started guide if they included the Scala version here. Yeah, so it's done using a directive, so-called directive, which is specific to Scala CLI. Okay, maybe it's not here. I'll just search for it, I guess. So here I'll write Scala version, and I'll see how to specify Scala version. So maybe Scala version directive. And I see it tells me what I need to put in this script to specify the Scala version. So I'll just copy this line over here. I'll go back to VS Code. I'll paste it. And here I'll specify the versions that I want, which is the latest one, 3.2.1. And then what I want is, I want to run the basic hello world program to just know that it works. So I'll do main, I'll do def. That's the way we were covering during the previous seminar to how to run the Scala program from VS Code, which is main def. I'll call it main. And then I'll write print line hello world. And then I go to the terminal. And in the terminal, I'll do Scala CLI. I'll do main Scala. And hopefully it will work. Yeah, so it says hello world. So our setup works. So next, what we want is to be able to use libraries from Scala, which, well, libraries are some pieces of software that other people wrote for us. And now we were discussing APIs, right? So it would be good to know how exactly you can call an API, because like, yeah, sure, you have a link. For example, I can have a URL that I want to call, which comes from here, for example. I'm not sure if I can call this API directly without logging in. Yeah, I think here I do need to log in because there is this authorize button, but maybe there is some APIs that doesn't require me to log in. But maybe we will take as an example API from the libraries that we are going to see. But the point is that what you want is there is a URL, and you need to teach the program how to call this URL, and this is done via a library. So what you might want to do is you might want to search for HTTP client or Scala. And let's see if it gives me the client that I want. Okay, unfortunately, it doesn't give me the client that I want. What I want is to browse all of the clients that are available for Scala, all of the libraries that are available for Scala. So to do that, I would search for awesome Scala. And then it gives me the directory of all of the libraries that are available for Scala, like the recommended libraries that are available for Scala. And what we want is something for web development, because we are accessing the internet. And for the web development, we have several subcategories, which would be for various things. Like, for instance, you can send emails, you can handle forms that people submit to your server. But what we want is HTTP servers and clients. Specifically, we want clients. So HTTP stands for the technology to access the internet. And client stands for we are accessing the internet. Server, if it would be server, it would stand for people are accessing our program via the internet. So if we are doing the accessing, it is a client, we are the client. And if other people are accessing our program, we are the server. So we go to this servers and clients, and immediately what we need to do is to filter out the Scala versions that we are using. So we are using Scala 3, so we put here the tick box. And so there are various libraries that are available for us to access the APIs. But what we want is requests Scala library, because it is fairly simple. It is fairly straightforward to use. So we click that, and what we get is some general information about the library. So we get some description here, what it is all about, and you also get some documentation. And where it comes from is, well, it comes from GitHub, because all of the libraries that are available for the programmer, they live on GitHub. So, for instance, if you click here the GitHub badge, what you're going to get is a web page of this library. And this web page, it has some general description about the library, and it is the same description that is also here. So this one is taken from GitHub. So in this description, you will usually find the information about how to start using the library, how to make your first request, so all things like that. So maybe let's start by figuring out how to get the library into Scala, because usually the libraries, they live in the internet, and to use them with Scala, you need to download them. And to do that, you need to pick the versions that you want to download. So go to 27 versions here, and it lists you all of the versions available. Typically what you want is the latest version, the most up-to-date one, so you click that. And then you have, here you have the description of how to use this, this library with various tools. Now, Scala, it is used in various scenarios, in various applications. And for different applications, there are different build tools that are better for that application. So what is a build tool? Well, build tool is something that is a program. Build tool is a program that you use to run Scala. And for instance, if your project is small, then you want a simpler build tool that you do not need to configure. You just write Scala CLI main.scala, and it runs that main.scala file. So Scala CLI is also a build tool, and main.scala is the file that you want to run, and our program is small, so we want a simple build tool. So we just use Scala CLI because it is the simplest one. But we only have one file, and we might be having like a couple thousand of files if we are building something big, like a social network, for example. You can easily get 1,000 files. So if you have a lot of files, what you want is a more complicated build tool that knows how to handle all those files. And that's, for example, can be SBT. And all of those other build tools, they have different format for making themselves aware about the libraries that we are using. So we need to pick the right build tool for our objectives. So in our case, which build tool should we pick from this list of tabs? Does anyone have any idea in chat? Yes, that's right. So we're using Scala CLI. So what we want is Scala CLI. And as you can see, there is, again, this syntax with a comment and a greater than sign to use it. And it's specific to Scala CLI. And it is something that is called a directive in Scala CLI. It's not a part of standard Scala. It's part of Scala CLI as a build tool. It's described at the Scala CLI documentation, so you can read more about it. And it allows you to configure various aspects of how the language can be treated. So you can, for example, put a version of the Scala language as a directive. You can put various configuration of your operating system as directives. You can put various libraries as directives. So you can see here to the right, you have a lot of things that you can configure. Like also you have the main class that you can configure, like the main method that should be the entry point. But the point is that here we have this piece of code that is provided by the Scala Dex, by this website with the libraries that we can just copy, or click here, we copy it, and we go to the program and we paste it. And then that should give us this requests library, and we can hopefully start using it. And how do we use it? Well, to know how to use it, we again go to the library page and read the documentation of how it works. And you see the contents here, and there is getting started page. Well, it sends us to the main repository here with the same documentation. So getting started, well, it's here it tells us to import it in our favorite build tool, which we have already done. And then we have our first request, and we have some code that we need to write for this request to happen. So what we can do is just copy it, and we can paste it in our program. So paste it, and I'll correct the indentation. I'll remove those comments over here because they're comments. So as you can see, it's calling. What it does is first it has this requests.get thing, and requests.get refers to this HTTP get method that we discussed previously. So one of those methods that we discussed. So it is get in our case, and then we have the URL, the link, and the link, it refers to api.github.com. So github.com, it stands for the GitHub, this website where all the libraries live. And API prefix here, it stands for the API of this website for people to be able to access the content of the website programmatically. And then it has this users/lihaoi. So users is it's obvious from the titles that it's about users of GitHub. You're about to access the user of GitHub. And then you have slash and lihaoi, which is the name of the person, of this person who authored the library. So you see here that he's the author, and his name is lihaoi. So if you run this link, you should be able to get the information about him. You can actually click it and see in your browser what it gives us, which is this. And you can run the code as usually from Scala. And it gives us some errors. So it says first method text in very big byte data must be called with parentheses. We just need to do just that. So r.text, it's called like this. We need to just to do the things that it tells us to do. Put the parentheses here, and then run it again. The reason I had to put the parentheses is because, the language changes, and if previously it was possible to call the method like this, then now you need parentheses for some reasons that I will not get into. Well, we see that the program runs correctly, but we do not see anything. So does anyone have any idea why didn't we see any output in the console? What I should do to see something in the terminal here? Just your best guess. As a hint, I'll say that text here, the call to the text method, it returns a string. Well, it's not really about the R, I mean the code executed successfully. The real problem here is that r.text, it returns a string, but we didn't give a command to print that string to screen. So what we need to do is to write print line, and inside this print line, we have the stuff that we want to print, which is a result of the request in the text format. So if you run this again, then we see a lot of text. And the text that we see here is the same as we see over here. And this one turns out to be the text in machine readable format. So it's easy to read it using a computer program. And you can see that it is fairly structured. So it has those curly braces, and between those curly braces, it has a bunch of fields, and every field is the name of the field in quotes, then a colon, and then the value of that field. And it turns out that this format is very, very popular and used for the majority of the APIs, and it is called JSON. So you can Google JSON format. And we will see maybe JSON format specification. So JSON is the format in which software communicates over the internet. So it's like the common language in which everything, all the services or all the programs on the internet, they communicate. And here you can see the formal specification, which might not be so interesting. It's too formal. But I mean, the idea of the format is like, for instance, if you have something to send over the internet, like for instance, if you want to send the data about the user over the internet, you make it follow a regular structure, which is a piece of text, and the piece of text is a bunch of like two curly braces, and in the curly braces you have various things that you send. Like for instance, if it is a user, you send a name of the user, and the name is a certain name. So you have a name like Lihaui in our case. Then you have a comma, and then you have another parameter, yeah, email, as software suggests me here, and the email would be, I don't know, and so on and so forth. And you can have various other interesting things you can do with this format, which we are not going to go into details right now. But it's the point to realize is that it is a regular format that is used for the majority of the APIs. The question is like, how exactly do you make sense of it? Like, for instance, it's a string now, but then what you want is to extract some data from that string. Like, for instance, you might want to get the login of the person. So how do you do that? And does anyone have any hint, any idea of what the answer might be? Like what, not in code, but what we might want to use to get this information in the program? So does anyone have any idea of what we are going to use next time? What we are going to use to access login of the user? So get was the stuff that we used before. It was the endpoint method that it was the HTTP method that we were calling user requests library. So the requests library over here, it was a library that solved the problem of accessing data online. And now we have another problem. Another problem is how to make sense of this data, because we got this mass of a string, and what you want is to extract individual data from that string. So what you want is a solution for that problem. What you want is another library for that problem. So what we would want is we want the micropickle library. To access the login. So well, I already called this library micropickle, but I mean, the important part is that it is a library. The important part is that we need another library to do that. And that library happens to be micropickle, it's called. And why micropickle? Well, because it's from the same author as requests. So requests was written by Lichaoi, and the micropickle library is also written by him. I'll just access it here. It's a pretty well-known library in the Scala ecosystem, and it has some documentation here. So you see that on the website, on the GitHub, we also have a little documentation which refers us to a bigger documentation as a separate website, and it tells us how to import this library. So what we might want to do is to find it on Scala Dex over here. We just search for micropickle so that we can import it to our project. So we go to versions, then we go to the version that is latest, then we pick Scala CLI, then we copy this directive, and then we make it available in our project like this. Then what we want is we want to be able to access the API, and the way you access it, let me just check in the documentation of the requests itself. I'm just looking for, yeah, so this is the documentation of requests. There is a separate section actually for handling JSON. JSON was the format that we were discussing just now. So that's by the way I knew about the micropickle library, because there is a section here on how to handle JSON data, and it sends me to micropickle, and then it tells us what exactly to do with this JSON. So you see here that he calls some API method just the same way as we did. So requests.get blah blah blah. Here also requests.get blah blah blah. And then he has also r.text, the same as us. So we get the text as a string. Then what he has is microjson.read. So let's try that. So here we do microjson.read. Results as text. And then what we do is print it. And let's see what happens if we go to try it. So it compiles, and it seems that the output is the same, but there is no error. So what he said here in the documentation to call microjson.read is it works. So then to access the login data, we just use a syntax that is similar to the collection syntax. We just use the quotes and say login like this. And if we run this software, we should get Lichaoi, which comes from this API over here. So from the information returned about this person. So login Lichaoi, and it says Lichaoi here. And similarly, we can get access to any of the other fields over here. So for instance, we might want to know how, we might want to know the biography of this person. So we copy the biography key, and then we put it instead of login over here. And then we run the program again. And then we get the biography of this person. Same way, if you want, for example, to access a number of his repositories that he has, which is the projects that he uploaded to GitHub. So if you want to know how many projects he uploaded to GitHub, you put public repos here, and then it works the same way. Okay, so these are the APIs. Is it clear so far? Are there any questions? So while you come up with your questions, maybe I can just summarize what we learned. Okay, let me get my whiteboard back. If you have any questions, you can write them in chat. So what we have learned today is about the continuation of the discussion started during the previous seminar. And the discussion started during the previous seminar was that online there are various tools that other programmers has made available for us to be able to build programs with. Like, for instance, online there might be a database of all flights. Online there might be a service that, like a robot, that allows you to, for example, book a hotel. So these are services that exist online, and there might be also pieces of code that other programmers have written to for you to access those services. Like, for instance, there might be a piece of code to interact with flight service. And there might be also code like, for instance, if you're dealing with flights, chances are you're also dealing with things like date and time. And the question is, how do you deal with that in your software? So there might be some code that was made available online by other people to work with calendar data. And so the modern programming, it is all about being aware about all of those different pieces that are there for our usage, like online services. So these are online services, and also these ones are libraries. So as a programmer, you need to be aware about what services are available to you, what libraries are available to you, and the name of the game is to know how to interact with all of them. And today we were figuring out how to interact with both of them. So for online services, the mode of interaction was about HTTP requests, where HTTP is technology behind internet. And requests, it stands for, well, making requests online to different other services to make some data available to you. And libraries, well, the technique to interact with the libraries is to make your build tool aware about them. So in our case, it was using directive. using lib, and then the coordinates of that lib as specified by Scala dex. So Scala dex is an index of all the libraries, where you can find all of the libraries on this website. So something like that, yeah. So are there any questions about the today's material? Anyone? Okay, so if there are no more questions, then have a great week, everyone, and thank you for coming. And of course, it's a good idea to practice those skills on your own. Just to open the editor and try playing with different APIs, see how they work, and that alone also gives you a lot of knowledge on Scala itself. So yeah, thank you for coming, and have a great week, everyone. Bye bye.